On a quiet Sunday morning in Scarborough, a 21-year-old aspiring rapper named Malik Lil Mel Ellis stepped out of his apartment with his girlfriend to do something painfully ordinary: laundry. It was the kind of routine that fades into the background of daily life, the kind of moment no one ever imagines could become fatal. Malik was from Malvern, in the East End of Scarborough, a neighborhood that has long carried a complicated reputation in Toronto. To outsiders, Malvern is often reduced to crime statistics, police press releases, and political talking points. But to the people who grow up there, it is home. It is families, schoolyards, corner stores, and friendships that stretch back to childhood. It is also a place where young black men are often viewed through a lens of suspicion before they are ever seen as individuals. Malik was one of those young men trying to carve out his own path. Known to friends as Lil Mel, he was an aspiring rapper, using music as both expression and escape, hoping to build a future that extended beyond the limits so often placed on people from his community. He was a son, a twin brother, a boyfriend, someone who believed his life was still unfolding. The night before his murder, Malik and his girlfriend had celebrated her 18th birthday. It was a small but meaningful milestone, the kind of moment that should live on as a happy memory. They stayed up late, talked, laughed, and eventually went to sleep. The next morning felt normal, quiet, routine. They decided to head downstairs together to do laundry, something they had likely done countless times before. When they stepped into the hallway of their Scarborough apartment building, something immediately felt wrong. A young man wearing a hoodie was nearby, walking slowly, deliberately, glancing back over his shoulder more than once. His presence didn't feel natural. They didn't recognize him. "Who is that?" they whispered to each other, a question driven by instinct rather than evidence. Malik's girlfriend walked ahead toward the stairwell, expecting him to follow a few steps behind her like always. But he didn't. As the heavy stairwell door closed, the hallway behind her erupted with gunfire. Not one shot, not a warning. 15 bullets shattered the silence, echoing off concrete walls. Frozen in shock, she stood still for a moment before forcing herself to turn back. When she opened the door, the world she knew ended. Malik was lying on the floor, bleeding, motionless. As she collapsed screaming for help, she saw someone running away. The same man in the hoodie they had noticed moments earlier. In Toronto, stories like this often disappear quickly. Another shooting, another young black man killed, another family shattered. Malik's death did not dominate headlines. It did not spark citywide outrage. It quietly joined a long list of names that the city would soon move past. But investigators continued working the case, slowly building a circumstantial picture through surveillance footage, cell phone records, and movement data. That trail eventually led to Henok Sherlock Mabratu, a name that was already well known to police. Mabratu was from Chesterley Boulevard in North York, an area that, like Malvern, has long been associated with heavy police surveillance, violent crime, and strained relationships between residents and law enforcement. His past mattered because Malik's murder did not happen in isolation. It was part of a pattern. Years before Malik Ellis was executed in that hallway, Mabratu had already been charged with first-degree murder in another Scarborough killing. That case involved another cold-blooded shooting, another life taken, another family destroyed. And yet, despite the seriousness of the charge, Mabratu walked away without a conviction. Whether due to lack of evidence, witness issues, or the high burden of proof required for first-degree murder, the outcome was the same. He remained free. No life sentence. No long-term incarceration. No removal from the streets. For the justice system, the case was closed. For the public, it faded from memory. But for the families involved, the damage was permanent. And for Mabratu, it meant something else, that he had already faced the most serious charge possible and survived it. That earlier case matters because it establishes a trajectory. By the time Malik was killed, Mabratu was not an unknown offender or someone new to violence. He had already been accused of taking a life once before. He had already navigated the criminal justice system at its highest level and emerged without consequences. In the years that followed, he was also charged with forcing a teenage girl into prostitution, Another deeply serious offense that painted a picture of someone willing to exploit, control, and harm others. And still, he remained free, living his life, moving through the city. This is the context that makes Malik's murder even more disturbing, not just because of what happened, but because of what had already happened before it. On the morning of Malik's murder, the evidence would later show that nothing was random. At around 9:30 a.m., Mobratu left his girlfriend's apartment in Mississauga. He drove directly to Malik's building near Eglinton Avenue East and Markham Road. He didn't wander. He didn't hesitate. He entered the building, made his way to the third floor, and waited. This wasn't a confrontation that escalated. It wasn't a spontaneous act. According to the court, he stood in that hallway with a loaded firearm, waiting for Malik Ellis to exit his apartment. When Malik did, the plan was carried out with brutal efficiency. 15 shots at close range. No warning. No chance to escape. In roughly 90 minutes, Mobratu left Mississauga, entered Scarborough, killed a 21-year-old man in his own building, and returned. The calmness and control of the act weighed heavily in court. When the case finally reached trial years later, Ontario Superior Court Justice Michael Brown did not soften his language. He ruled that the shooting was not impulsive, not triggered by an argument, and not caused by any immediate disturbance. He concluded that Mobratu went to the building with the intention to kill and waited until he could carry it out. The judge described the act as predatory in nature, saying it was tantamount to an execution. And yet, despite the conviction, one of the most haunting questions remained unanswered. Why? No clear motive was presented at trial. There was no proven feud between Malik from Malvern and Mobratu from Chester Lee Boulevard. No confirmed dispute. No explanation that could make sense of the violence. Whether it was rooted in neighborhood tensions, mistaken identity, or something never revealed, Malik was killed without the world ever truly understanding why. The most devastating moment in the courtroom didn't come from surveillance footage or cell phone records. It came from Malik's mother, Claire Ellis. Speaking over Zoom, she described the son she lost, not as a victim but as a human being. She told the court Malik was happy, loving, forgiving, and held no malice for anyone. She said he was known and loved wherever he went, remembered for his gentle presence. She spoke about the last time she saw him alive, just a week before his death, when she cooked him his favorite meal, lasagna. At the time, it was just a normal family moment. Now it was frozen in time. The next time she saw her son, it was in a morgue. She told the court she would never again hear him say, "Hey Mom, love you Mom," and would never feel his hugs. She said she felt robbed of his future, of the life he was meant to live, and of time she should have had with her child. She never got to say goodbye. In September, 8 years after Malik Ellis was murdered, Henrik Sherlock Mobratu was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. For the justice system, it was a conclusion. For the family, it was simply confirmation of loss. Justice delayed did not feel like justice at all. And for Claire Ellis, the pain did not stop there. Years later, tragedy struck the Ellis family again. Malik's twin brother, Malcolm Ellis, was also shot and killed in Scarborough. Twins share a bond that few people can fully understand. Growing up side by side, often experiencing life as a shared identity. Losing one twin is devastating. Losing both is unimaginable. What makes Malcolm's death even more haunting is what followed. 2 days after Malcolm was killed, the man responsible for his murder was himself dead. On November 28, 2021, Zachary Cust was shot and killed at a hotel in Windsor. Malcolm's killer never faced trial. There was no courtroom. Violence closed the case instead of justice, leaving no answers and no accountability. For Claire Ellis, the loss became unbearable. She did not lose one son to gun violence, she lost both. 2 twins from Malvern. 2 futures erased. One executed in a hallway by a man who had already beaten a murder charge before. The other killed in a separate act of violence, his killer dying days later. The system delivered delayed justice for one son and no justice at all for the other. And while the city continued on, one mother was left carrying a grief that has no expiration date. Malik and Malcolm Ellis's stories are not isolated tragedies. They reflect a broader reality in Toronto, a city where cycles of violence repeat, where people accused of serious crimes can return to the streets, and where accountability often arrives too late. Henok Mabratu's history shows how dangerous those gaps can be. An earlier murder charge that ended without conviction. Serious criminal allegations that did not result in long-term incarceration. And eventually a calculated execution in a hallway. Malvern in Scarborough and Chester Lee Boulevard in North York are frequently portrayed as separate worlds, each carrying its own reputation, history, and stigma. Yet cases like this reveal how interconnected those worlds really are. The same cycles of surveillance, marginalization, and normalized violence repeat themselves across postal codes. Young men grow up under similar pressures, learning early how quickly conflict can escalate and how little room there is for mistakes. When violence spills from one area into another, it exposes how fragile the idea of contained crime really is. Malik Ellis did not die because of where he lived, but the environment he was born into shaped how quickly his death was forgotten by a city already overwhelmed by similar tragedies. Mabratu's earlier murder charge looms heavily over this case because it represents a moment where intervention might have altered the outcome. Being charged with first-degree murder is not a minor brush with the law. It is the most serious allegation a person can face in Canada. Yet when that case ended without a conviction, Mabratu returned to the same streets, the same social circles, and the same unresolved patterns of behavior. The criminal justice system is built on the principle of presumed innocence, but it also relies on risk assessment, supervision, and accountability. When someone accused of extreme violence remains free, the consequences do not disappear, they are deferred. In Malik's case, that deferral was fatal. The justice system did not create the violence, but it failed to stop it when warning signs were already present. There is also a quieter, less visible aftermath that rarely gets discussed. The ripple effect on witnesses, loved ones, and entire communities. Malik's girlfriend did not just lose her partner. She lost her sense of safety in the most basic routines of life. Laundry rooms, hallways, stairwells, places that should feel neutral, became associated with trauma. For neighbors in the building, the sound of gunfire at 9:30 in the morning shattered the illusion that violence only happens late at night or between people who choose that life. Children who heard the shots that morning will carry that sound with them long after the police tape was removed. These invisible wounds accumulate, shaping how communities relate to one another, how they trust institutions, and how they imagine their own futures. The deaths of both Malik and his twin brother Malcolm also force a reckoning with how grief compounds over time. Losing a child is often described as an impossible pain, but losing two children, twins, to gun violence defies language. For Claire Ellis, there was no chance to heal between losses. The second death reopened the first wound and deepened it. Malcolm's killing, followed by the death of his killer just 2 days later, denied the family even the possibility of answers. No trial means no public accounting, no official record of responsibility, and no moment where the truth is laid bare. Instead, violence closed the circle, leaving silence where justice should have been. This is how cycles persist, not just through bullets, but through unanswered questions. Taken together, these cases reveal something deeply unsettling about how modern urban violence operates. It is not always chaotic or impulsive. Sometimes it is patient, calculated, and invisible until the moment it explodes. Henok Mabratu waiting silently in a hallway is emblematic of a reality that is far more unsettling than chaos or spur-of-the-moment violence. It represents patience. It represents intent. It represents a kind of violence that is planned, rehearsed, and executed with chilling calm. This was not a heated argument that spiraled out of control, not a sudden confrontation that ended in tragedy. This was someone positioning himself in a private residential building, blending into the background, watching doors, listening for footsteps, and waiting for the exact moment to act. When violence looks like that, quiet, deliberate, almost invisible, it becomes much harder to stop. There are no raised voices, no warning signs in the moment, no opportunity for intervention. By the time the first shot is fired, the outcome has already been decided. Equally disturbing is what happens when accountability is erased entirely. In Malcolm Ellis's case, the man responsible for his death never faced a courtroom, never heard a verdict read aloud, never sat across from a grieving family, and had his actions formally acknowledged by the justice system. His death just 2 days later closed the legal process before it could begin. For the public, that might feel like a grim form of balance, violence answered by violence, but for families seeking truth, it leaves a void. No trial means no testimony, no cross-examination, no official narrative of what happened and why. It means questions linger forever. It means justice, whatever that word is supposed to mean, remains incomplete. And when that happens repeatedly, trust in the system erodes, not just for one family, but for entire communities watching from the outside. Then there is the unimaginable weight placed on a mother forced to bury both of her sons. Losing one child to gun violence is a trauma that never fully heals. Losing twins, 2 lives that shared the same beginning, the same home, the same childhood, is something few people can even comprehend. This is not just grief. It is a permanent fracture in a family's story. Every milestone, every memory, every future moment becomes marked by absence. And yet, stories like this are often reduced to brief headlines, crime scene photos, or sentencing summaries. The human cost is acknowledged briefly, then quietly set aside as the city moves on to the next case. These moments are not anomalies. They are symptoms of a system that reacts rather than prevents, that responds after lives are already gone instead of intervening when warning signs emerge. A system that struggles to reconcile individual cases with broader patterns. When someone once charged with first-degree murder is later convicted of another execution-style killing, it forces a difficult conversation about missed opportunities. When violence repeats itself across neighborhoods and generations, it raises questions about whether prevention is truly prioritized or whether the focus remains almost exclusively on punishment after the fact. And when those patterns are acknowledged only in hindsight, the cost is measured in lives. As viewers, listeners, and citizens, the question is not just what happened in these cases, but what keeps happening and why. Why do these stories feel familiar? Why do they follow similar arcs with different names and different locations, but the same devastating outcomes? Familiarity in this context is not comfort, it is a warning. It suggests that the underlying conditions remain unchanged, even as individual cases come and go. When executions in hallways, retaliatory killings, and unresolved deaths begin to blur together, the most troubling detail isn't the violence itself, but how normalized it has become.